In this video, we'll focus on the GE 6550A tube and the Sylvania 6550 tube, otherwise known as straight bottle 6550s. Now, if you're interested in a primer, an introduction to the various manufacturers and the styles of the vintage 6550 tube, I recommend you check out my other video. Now, it's 1970, and the story is Fender, the guitar company, is looking at manufacturing a monster guitar amp that's capable of delivering more than 400 watts RMS power. And for that amp, they're looking at the 6550 tube. Now it's 1970, so the tongue sole 6550 would have been in production for almost 15 years. But when they were using that tube for prototyping the amp, they saw that the amp was melting through the tongue sole 6550 tubes. So they reached out to GE to develop the specific tube that would meet the requirements of the monster amp. That monster guitar amp would become the Fender PS400 amp. And GE was able to work with Fender to deliver this tube that would meet the requirements of that amp. They did that by using a 5-ply metal design for their plate, reinforced glass, and so on. So they made this very robust version of the 6550 tube that's able to handle the requirement of that monster guitar amp. That guitar amp, PS400, is able to use 6 of these GE 6550A tubes to deliver more than 400 watts. And this is the only tube. The 6550A is the only tube that can be used in that amp. Obviously, all other 6550 tubes would just melt. So this was the first iteration that came out in 1971, along with that PS400 amp. If you look at this tube, it's got welded plates and 3 holes in the center. Now, at around the same time, Sylvania was working on their version of a 6550 tube, and they also came out with a straight bottle Sylvania tube. And if you notice, these two look very similar in terms of their design, except the Sylvania is about 20% smaller than the GE tube. Sylvania also has welded plates and 3 holes in the center, and even the top where the getters are on both of these tubes look very similar, except the size is a little bit more compact on the Sylvania tube. So chronologically speaking, this tube came out in 1971. This tube is supposedly come out at around the same time, maybe a year later. And this tube was in production until the late 70s. So this tube ran for about a decade from Sylvania. This is the Sylvania 6550 tube. And this tube here had an iteration. The second iteration of the GE 6550A tube came in the late 70s, and that was this tube here. And the difference between these two tubes is that the second iteration of the GE tube has stapled or stamped design on the plate, not welded. And if you notice closely, the 3 holes in the center of the plate, the middle hole is a rectangle compared to the older one iteration, which is a circle. So that would be the only difference between these two tubes in the 2 iterations. So the GE ran from about early 70s to, I have read that it was produced as late as 1991. So about 2 decades of production of this GE 6550A tube and 2 iterations. So you could say the older version of the first iteration ran for about a decade, almost 10 years, and this one for almost 10 years. So I have tried both of these tubes in quads on my monoblocks, 2 in one channel, 2 in another channel, to figure out if I hear any differences. Very, very slight differences is what I was able to hear, but they were so minor that I would say there's almost no difference between the way these 2 tubes sound on my stereo amp, on my MI75 monoblocks. Slight different, but nothing too apparent. So if somebody didn't know that I was running these two different iterations, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Because I knew, I was able to pick up on maybe 5% difference in the sound, but that's because I think I knew it was not a blind test. So very similar tube. As you can see, a slight difference in the plate design and the holes there. But apart from that, these two are GE 6550As. Now, when it comes to sound, I tried the Sylvania as well with the GE 6550A, and that's the tube that I could tell is quite different sounding from the GE. I would be able to tell the difference between these two in a blind test. There's a different sound signature to the Sylvania 6550 tube compared to the GE 6550A tube. So yeah, it's just a quick video I wanted to make showing the differences between the two different iterations of the GE tubes and the Sylvania here. Hope you found this video helpful. Thank you for watching.